Hello math friends. Today we're going to be looking at solving trig equations. So you know from the past few videos that you've watched, most of the time what we want to do is isolate our trig function. So we can treat this just like a regular equation here, and what we're going to do with number 7 from page 260 is we're going to try to isolate the cotangent of x. So first we're going to start by subtracting 1. And we end up with 2 cotangent of x equals -2. Next, we want to try and eliminate that coefficient, so the opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. So we're going to divide by 2 both sides, and we get cotangent of x equals -1. So when we think about cotangent of x equals -1, remembering that cotangent of x is the reciprocal function of the tangent of x. So we have really 1 over -1, which is still the same as -1. So our objective here is to figure out what x is. We want to know what that angle is. We need to think about our unit circle. So we spent a long time on unit circle. This is why it all kind of culminates here. We know that tangent is sine of x divided by cosine of x. And in order for sine of x over cosine of x to be -1, we really need to think about the angle that that happens at. If you remember, our 45-degree angles or our pi over 4 angles, we're looking at rad 2 over 2, rad 2 over 2 for both the sine and the cosine. If I divide sine by the cosine, when I divide any number by itself, I get 1. Over here we have rad 2 over 2 comma negative rad 2 over 2. In the second quadrant, we have negative rad 2 over 2 comma rad 2 over 2. And over here in the third quadrant, both the x and the y are negative. And so there we go. Now when we think about which of these angles fits our problem here, where it's equal to -1, remember that tangent is positive here, tangent is negative here, tangent is positive here, and tangent is negative here. So these two angles are the two angles that we're talking about. I believe that we're talking about degree mode here. So our angle, the first one is going to be 135 degrees, or let's see, this is pi, 2 pi, 3 pi over 4. And the other angle is going to be right over here, and this is 315 degrees, or 7 pi over 4. And so that's what we're looking at for our answers for this particular problem. We can go about looking at number 8 the same way. We want to isolate our trig function, so that means we're going to start here by subtracting 2 from each side. So we have the sine of x equals 1, and thinking about where that happens on our unit circle, because again we want to find out what x is, that's our angle. So if we think about this point over here is 0, 1. That is at 90 degrees or pi over 2. And that is our angle measured. And if we think about this problem number 10 here, notice how I have a secant on both sides of the equation. I have to do a little bit of work with this one. I'm going to try to get everything over to the left-hand side. So if I subtract secant of x, I'm going to get 2 secant of x minus secant of x, which is just going to be 1 secant of x. And now I can think about subtracting 1 from each side. And when I do that, I'm going to get secant of x equals 2. So this is a little bit hard to see on our unit circle because we don't really have secant of x on our unit circle. We have sines, cosines on our unit circle. So I want to think about the reciprocal function here. The reciprocal function of secant is cosine. So I could change this a little bit to make it a little bit easier to use my unit circle. I can make this cosine of x equals 1/2. So I'm using the reciprocal function and taking the reciprocal of that number. So this is a little bit better for me to work with. If I think about on my unit circle, where cosine of x is equal to 1/2, that happens right up here at 60 degrees. Remember our ordered pair here is 1/2, comma rad 3/2. And the other place where that happens is going to be down here. Remember, cosine is our x value. We have a positive 1/2 here and a negative rad 3/2. So I'm looking at our values of x. Our 1/2, that is my cosine of theta. So this angle is 60 degrees, or what we call pi/3. And this angle over here is 300 degrees, or what we call 5pi/3. And that's it for now.